And I know you guys are here to talk about how to break into Hollywood. And I'm going to warn you right now that my story is it's not like any other like how I broke into Hollywood story that you have probably ever heard, but there is an important lesson that comes out of it. Um, First, just to give you kind of a rundown on my credits and what I've done, I've worked in features and in television. I've worked in animation. I've published a novel. I edited a comic book. I wrote Agent Cody Banks, of all things. Thor, X-Men First Class. I worked on, uncredited, a bunch of stuff that I know that you've seen. Television, I got my start, and this is going to be a big part of the story section on a show called Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda. It's my first staff writing gig. I worked on UPN's Twilight Zone, which is only the second worst iteration of the Twilight Zone. I worked on the Sarah Connor Chronicles, Gone Too Soon. I worked on Fringe, could not get out of it fast enough. Black Sails, which was a fantastic experience. Season 2 of Lore on Amazon. I created Dota Dragon's Blood and animation on Netflix with Studio Mir, who did Avatar and Korra and Voltron and all that good stuff. Um, I co-wrote with my writing partner a novel called Colin Fisher for the YA market, and I edited an independent comic book called Living in Infamy. So if you have questions about any of those media, uh, I'm happy to answer any of it because the truth of the matter is it's all interconnected. It's all related. It's all just writing. It's all part and parcel of the same thing, right? We're all creators. It's what we do, whether we're creating in the context of somebody else's show or somebody else's film, or inside of our own context. It doesn't matter. That's the job. Uh, and I would say that job is an important word because it is a job. I wake up every morning at 4:30. I work 8 to 12 hours a day. I work like a maniac. I do that constantly, pumping out material, reading, watching things, all of that. And I bring that up when we're talking about how to break in because, well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend waking up at 4:30 every morning because I doubt many of you have twin boys who dominate your morning otherwise. Um, I do recommend the work. So here's how I broke in. I told you I was on the 5-year plan. I got out. I became a teacher. I taught eighth grade English and creative writing in Fairfax County. I did that for a year. Then I went to work for a government contractor, working out of the Pentagon, working for my future father-in-law, as it turned out. So, I got that out of the gig. Uh, and I did that for about 7 years. Didn't come anywhere near LA, nowhere near Hollywood. In fact, I didn't land in Hollywood until I was 29. So how did I do that? Okay. Well, I got my break because I met my writing partner on the internet. Now, listen, this is when the internet was cans and string. Okay. This is when Usual Suspects made sense because it would take 2 hours to send a picture over a fax, right? Like that's what we're talking about. I didn't see the guy's face for 3 years while we were writing together. Okay. The first time I saw his face, I was meeting him for the first time. And that was also when we learned that we had sold our first pitch. So we had been writing together for 3 years. We had been pitching shows to episodes to Star Trek because Star Trek had an open pitching policy. And through that, we met our first boss, Robert Wolf, on Andromeda. Now, this is all boring detail. It doesn't help you, except the way we got our job was he had heard some of our pitches. He liked one. He wanted to buy it. He invited us to pitch again. Great. Went in, pitched 7 stories. He bought 5 in the room. Why? Because we'd done our homework, went back, watched everything that he had written, figured out what was his sense of story. What did he find interesting? What did he like? What did he tend to stay away from? His most effective episodes, what were they when he was working on Star Trek? And we built our pitches around that paradigm. We tailored our ideas and how to express them so that he would recognize them as story. And well, he did. Like I said, he bought 5. He gave us an assignment. We went into the room. We worked in the room for a week. We turned in our outline at the end of that week we were working in. It was just done. We turned in our script once that got approved in less than 2 weeks. And then we got hired on to the show. So what I used to tell people was I met somebody on the internet and then I fell out of the sky with a job. That is not what happened, because here's what was happening underneath all of that, and why I say, you know, working constantly is so important. So while I was teaching and while I was working for the Navy, I wrote solidly 30 hours a week, just working on just pumping out scripts that aren't very good, just learning how to do the job, figuring out how to be a writer. And then on top of that, I would go and I would watch everything. I read and consumed whatever material exists. Now, you guys live in a world where there are like 100 more books on screenwriting. There are all kinds of books on how to do this, right? Everybody and their mom has a theory. There are YouTube videos, there's whatever, right? We could go through all of that. I can tell you 99% of it is crap. But I read what was available to me. And then I would go, to the movies, or I would, rent a video or whatever, because, back then, like, weren't able to just stream things. And I would, as I watched, I would try to keep up with what I was watching in my head and write it out in my brain to describe it as kind of quickly and easily as possible, just as practice for thinking about how to write for screen. I would spend time after I watched things, breaking them down and asking myself, well, how did that work? And the thing is, it didn't work. Why didn't they work? What would change if I did something differently? And what all this boils down to is the number one most important thing that you can do to break in is to learn how to do the job. The only way to learn how to do the job is to do it over and over and over again, and to study the form, to study what works, study what you think doesn't work, and attempt to apply it. It's the reason why I moved away from telling people that I got lucky and fell out of the sky is because it wasn't true. The truth of the matter is I worked very hard for, altogether, probably 9 years before I really had an opportunity. And all of that work that I put in made it possible for me to A, recognize the opportunity, and B, capitalize on the opportunity. That's what luck is. Okay. If you aren't in a position where you can recognize the opportunity and capitalize on the opportunity will pass you by, and you will shake your fist at the clouds and wonder why that other person is so lucky. They're not lucky. They recognize the opportunity and capitalized on it. You're not going to be able to capitalize on every opportunity, but if you recognize them, it becomes a numbers game. There's a thing. I think it might have been my therapist. Look, man, you're in Hollywood, you go to therapy like you're going to the gym, okay? And my therapist likes to say, look, a successful predator is successful about 33% of the time. Okay, what does that mean? That means that, 66, 67% of the time, the predator goes home hungry. And in this business, it means it's 66, 67% of the time you walk away disappointed. You don't get the gig. You don't succeed. The meeting doesn't go well, like whatever, however you want to define that. So other than doing all the work required to make it possible for you to recognize the opportunity and capitalize on it, you have to make peace with the idea that you will fail. And you will fail a lot. And by the way, getting up to that 33% number is in itself a learning curve. You don't start at 33%. You start at 5%, right? That's something that you have to build on and you have to start delivering, because then that creates opportunities. Which brings us to really the third thing that's super important. And I think in many ways, look, I do a lot of mentoring. There's a veterans program that the Writers Guild runs, and I do this every year. And I've got a number of vets who've come back who want to get into the business, who want to be writers, and are working their asses off to do that. And the number one thing I think that gets in all of their ways is a fear of failure. You can't be afraid of failure, right? Like, look, I get it. When we write, sometimes we sit and we look at the page and we think, oh, it's not good enough. And then it sits there and it doesn't go anywhere, right? Because we don't think we can finish it, because when we do finish it, it won't be any good. Okay. You have to embrace failure, your own failures. You have to let failure be the great teacher. You cannot succeed before you fail, right? The trick is to make part of your process learning from what isn't working. And I can tell you, whether you are doing this for, 3 months, 3 years, 30 years, it doesn't matter. There will always be moments when you're just going, that simply isn't working. But once you're in and it's your job, you don't have the luxury of saying, well, I'm just going to put it away. You've got a deadline, man. At some point, it's pencils down. At some point, you simply have to deliver, and it's done. So making peace with the idea that you abandon your art rather than finish it is critical to your success. So, these are all life skills and approaches and processes and mindsets. Okay, that's the base on which you build everything else. Okay, so how do you actually get in, right? So say that you're doing all of these things. How do you put yourself in a position where you can take an opportunity? Well, there's a couple of ways to do it. So here's the tried and true and the old fashioned. You move to LA. You find a writing group. You make friends who are in the industry, their assistants, people that you would come up with. You apply for assistant jobs, internships. Whether that is at an agency or on a show or on a feature or whatever it is, to get your foot in the door, because the foot in the door is what grants you access. Okay. Making friends who are also attempting to do the same thing creates a network that allows you to generate potentially more opportunities. Your network will do that. That is number one. The way that it worked for me, that networking occurred because I had a writing partner who was in LA and could meet people. But we also met some of these people, including our first showrunner, on the internet, yelling at other nerds about Star Trek, of all things, because I am a massive, unbelievable geek. You can't even believe. Like, imagine like the geekiest, nerdiest person. uh, I'm nerdier than they are. Okay, you just need to make your peace with that. You might think that you're the nerdiest person, you know. You're absolutely wrong. Um, it's 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 one of those things where you never know how you are going to encounter the important people in your life. Uh, but as with everything else, you have to prepare yourself to meet them. And when you meet them, put your best foot forward. Okay, so that brings me to the second way that people break in, making your own opportunities and putting your best foot forward. So I've had a couple of assistants, I think 3, maybe 4-ish, in the last 10 or 12 years. And at least 2 of them became my assistant because they had the wherewithal to reach out to me and create an opportunity. I didn't say, "Hey, I'm now hiring." I didn't put an ad somewhere. I didn't do any of that. My first assistant, writer named Shauna Benson, uh, and she just worked on Prodigy and some other stuff. She reached out to me on Twitter over DMs, and she said, "You clearly need an assistant, and I am going to schedule a lunch." And I said, "Well, holy crap. Okay, well, let's see where this goes," because, here's somebody who is like really taking the bull by the horns, right? It's like, if she can figure out how to get me from point A to point B at such and such a time, then uh, she's clearly qualified, right? Is she can manage me. So we went, I met with her, I read her. Uh, she had spec scripts that were great. And I said, okay. The spec scripts that were great were super important. She didn't show up thinking, well, I'm just going to wait for somebody to pay me. Okay. She had things that she had finished, and she presented them to me so that I could read them and assess her. I didn't assess her like she's, Scott Frank. Like I read her like she is what she was, which was what we call in the business a baby writer, right? Is there the drive? Is there the potential? And then on another level, can she actually get me to show up to lunch? And she passed all of those tests. She was my assistant for several years, and then she flew out of the nest, and she went and did her own thing, and more power to her. My second assistant did much the same thing. Uh, he was part of the veterans program, and I had just said goodbye to my first assistant, and my life was a mess because I am not an adult, and I needed her to take care of me. So I announced this when I was during one of the sessions with the vets, because I was like 10 minutes late. And I said, look, I don't have adult supervision. And so I'm late today, and here's what happened. And I went out for a snack into the snack room, and one of the vets walks up to me and he says, "Hey, I heard what you said about not having an assistant, and I want to apply for the job." Now, I hadn't said I was hiring an assistant. He just said, "I want to apply for the job that did not exist." And I said, "Okay, so I've read you, um, and I think you're great. Your ideas are great. Let's have uh, lunch or breakfast." I said, "But your first task is to get me there." So he got me to breakfast. We had a great talk, and I hired him, and he was awesome. And his name is Nick Jones, and he created a show on Netflix called Yasuke. And now he's married to a beautiful television star and has a beautiful family and all those other things. And I'm not saying that if you become my assistant, you will marry a beautiful television star and have a beautiful family. Those things are not part of the package. I don't include that like in my compensation guarantees. It just happened that way for him. And my last assistant did much the same thing. He sought me out. He said, "I want to work. This is what I want to do. Here's my stuff. And here's what I can do for you." And he's been my assistant now since 2019 while doing other jobs. Like he just keeps doing it for me. So there's a lot. It's like he created that opportunity. They all did. The the third way, and I honestly don't know anybody that this has happened to. Well, I do, but not anybody that I think does good stuff. Is somebody will simply say, here, take this. Here's your opportunity. Okay. That almost never happens outside the context of doing all the other things, right? Like outside of all of that, like it could happen to you. It could happen. Somebody could just reach out and say, you, um, here's a job out of nowhere. It can happen. Okay. It's like, oh, well, you're my, father's uncle's cousin's former roommate, and I want to give you a job. Okay. That can happen. Don't count on it. I think that once you're in the door, then it's a matter of, how do you stay inside the door, right? Like, how do you make the career happen? I'll tell you this much. So with features and with TV, it's slightly different. Okay. So if you want to write movies, the way that you get hired and you stay hired is you recognize that, first of all, be a decent human being, because people have to work with you, right? They wake up every morning and they look at their call list, and they're just like, oh my God, do I want to talk to this person today? Do I need that stress in my life? Right? Do I need to put up with that bullcrap? And I try very hard to be somebody that people wake up and go, oh, okay, I'm going to talk to Ashley today. And even if it's completely pointless, at least it will be fun. Because look, the people that you work with in the feature space, the executives, the directors, everybody, they walk around in a state of perpetual anxiety, because generally none of them know what the hell is going on. And the one thing that the writer can do that almost nobody else can is say, it's cool. We've got this. It works. I know what this is. And I know how to make this function, and we're going to be okay. If you can master the art of making people feel like they're going to be okay, you'll work forever. There are some deeply mediocre writers who work constantly simply because they are a part-time therapist, for their executive, for their producer, for whomever. And even if, they're not Aaron Sorkin, they turn around drafts that somebody can shoot, and they do it on time, and they hear notes and they address them and they deal with stuff. Okay. In the TV world, you have to remember, it's more complicated. When you meet on a show, you got one objective. If somebody has read you and they're meeting with you because they like your writing. You don't need to talk about it. You don't need to prove anything. Your entire objective in that meeting is to convince that person that they will not hate themselves after spending 11 to 12 hours a day in a room with you 5 days a week. That's it. Do they want to spend time with you? Are you worth their valuable time and their mental health and their sense of well-being, and all of that stuff? Because the truth is, there are plenty of people who want, very few jobs. And sometimes the match isn't about material, it's about personalities. The second thing that you have to remember in TV versus features, although a little bit in features, is that you don't matter unless it's your show. Pro tip, you won't have one for a while. What matters is the person that you're working for. It's their show. Your job is to do what they need you to do. Your job is to turn around drafts that they can then take to the next level, or to take their notes and to take their notes. Your job is to understand their voice and to figure out how to write in it. Okay. to reach back to one of the things I said very early on when I was preparing for our pitch to Andromeda, I went and I watched everything that Robert Wolfe had done. So I understood his voice. Okay. The other writers who had already been hired on that show, upper level writers on that show, had yet to sell a pitch to Robert. Here come these two crazy kids pitching 7 stories and selling 5 in the room, and they couldn't understand how he did it. So one of the first things we did after we got into the room was not in front of Robert, but we laid out for them, like, look, this is how it works. This is a Robert story, and that's what makes him like things. And they went, oh, okay, we get it. But that's your job when you're in TV. If you ever do have your own show, you have a slightly simpler job, which is to know exactly what you want and communicate it clearly. And that's it. But again, all of those things come back to your experience, learning what you can learn, accepting your failures, figuring out what your taste is, figuring out how to execute, figuring out what good execution actually means, and just doing that process iteratively, just to get things out the door, just to learn something, even if you put it away forever. Every writer has their own process. I could talk your ear off about different ways to approach tackling material. Okay, I could talk to you forever. I could do a whole course just on structure. All right. I don't know like any writer who thinks, I mean, they're certainly far better writers than I am, but I don't know any writer who thinks about structure as much as I do, simply because I just think about it. Any one of these things, could be an entire course. But if you have not made your peace with it's going to take effort to get in, and you have to put effort into learning it, that you don't walk out of school armed with everything you're going to need to know. I don't care, like, whether you go to William & Mary or you go to USC Film School, it does not matter. It doesn't really matter what your degree is. When I was at William & Mary, I was an English and government major. And most of my English degree was Renaissance Lit. It's perfect preparation for what I do now. Absolutely perfect preparation for what I do now. With a smattering of literary criticism. Perfect. Okay. Proust would have been an amazing screenwriter had he so chosen. Because everything that he talks about is 100% applicable to, what it is that we do. So, the specifics of like, do I need to take a course in screenwriting, right? Do I need to do a workshop? Do, I need to go to grad school and go to film school? The answer to all those questions is no. Is it valuable? Sure. Sure. If that interests you. If you're doing it to punch a ticket, then it's not really helping you. If you're doing it because it genuinely interests you and you genuinely want to study film, awesome, go and do it. If you're doing it because you think that that's a great way to network, you're 100% correct. That is a great way to network. There are way less expensive ways to do it. Okay, this thing is not cheap. It's like it's not cheap to go to film school, graduate school, or otherwise, and you're getting less out of it than you think. Hollywood rewards craftspeople, and that's an important distinction. It's, you can learn the craft anywhere. You want to direct? Awesome. Screw film school. Go and work on a set. Work on a real set and see what happens. Don't spend time with the director. Spend time with the first AD. Okay. Spend time with the DP. right? Spend time with those people who are the craftspeople. Understand what they do, and how what they do impacts the thing that you want to do. By the way, as you get to know them, it expands your network, right? So there are lots of ways to kind of to skin that cat. I don't recommend saving the cat, by the way. I have strong opinions on all that stuff, and we can talk about that if you guys have questions about that. But you know, let's see. I was seeing actually if there are any questions yet. There aren't any questions yet. You guys are like, you're all so wrapped, like, or you're asleep, which is also fine. Sleeping is good. I certainly don't get enough of it. So maybe let's talk a little bit about let's talk a little bit about how to find representation. Okay, how to find somebody, an agent, a manager, what that means, what they can do for you. That comes entirely out of your network. There was a time when people believed that you could write query letters and say, hey, I wrote this script and it's called Bob Goes to Hollywood and it's really great. And here's the log line. And if you would like to read it, then maybe you can be my representative. It doesn't work that way. You have to network. Generally speaking, if you want to be a writer and you land an assistantship or an internship, or any one of those things, then if you're working for a decent human, then they hired you understanding that you want to be a writer. My assistants have all gotten the representation via me because I said, okay, once you're ready, you wait. When you feel like you're ready, you show me the thing, okay, that then I will show to somebody who might want to represent you. And when they think they're ready, they do that. It can be very frustrating, very, very frustrating otherwise to try to find a rep. Generally speaking, also, here's another thing people don't tell you is agents and managers don't represent material. They don't sell scripts. I know that sounds shocking, but it's true. They don't sell scripts. What they sell is their client. They sell you. All right. Hollywood is full of people who somehow managed to write a great first screenplay, have no idea how they did it. They can't pull the trick off again, whether they finish it or they don't finish it. Their second and third outings are no good. You have to figure out how to generate material and generate it consistently, because an agent just bringing you along for the first time wants to know that there's a story to tell about you. Here are the 3 scripts that this person wrote, and I know they can execute in this space on this assignment, or on this television show. And you need to generate material for them all the time. In the last year, like I had this realization that I hadn't written an original spec since 2015, 2016. I said, oh shit. So on top of all the other stuff I was working on, I could tell you about, but then I'd have to kill you. I wrote in the last year 3 one-hour pilot specs and a spec feature, and most of a second spec feature, and most of another 1-hour pilot. As I told you, I get up at 4:30 in the morning, and that's what I do. If you want to get an agent, you have to demonstrate consistency, but you have to make the connection. I think managers are more likely to take a chance on the new kid on the block, for a variety of reasons. And if you're good at what you do and you seem eager and you seem like a hard worker, you'll find somebody. You just have to be positioned in the right way. I'm going to take a second. I'm going to look at some of the questions. Okay. So, all right, first question is about writing plays, and does that translate? So the answer to that question is it can. I think that any writing is useful writing. I think that anything that you do where you are learning the art of telling a story is useful to you. There are plenty of playwrights who come out and they do well in Hollywood. Some of them don't do great because playwriting it pretends to be a visual medium, but it's not a visual medium, right? And anybody who's sat in the theater in the back row can tell you that. I went last year. I was in London and I went to the Globe and I learned some things that I'd never known. Okay, which was the best seats in the house were not in front of the stage; they were off to the side. Why? Because the only thing going on stage were guys walking out with scrolls and they were reading lines to each other. There weren't props, there weren't sets, wasn't any of that. Okay. They were reading. It's called an auditorium for a reason. We're called an audience for a reason. It's audio. Plays, while they can present spectacle, are primarily not a visual medium. So just understand that there is a difference. I think, novelists struggle with other things, which is they don't get that you have to dramatize what people can see versus what's inside of somebody's head and striking that balance. But that said, here's where playwriting, especially directing plays, is really good. You learn to talk to actors and you learn the value of iteration if you're smart. All right. If you're not smart, you'll yell at your actors because of your failures as a writer, and you won't make changes, right? If you are smart, you'll hear the actors say it and you'll make changes. You'll learn how to direct them, right? You'll learn not to tell them what to do, but to tell them instead what they are doing. Important distinction, okay? I got a lot of unexpected prep for working with actors because I taught middle school, and they're needy, they have no boundaries, they do what they want, and they require a very steady hand. Actors are exactly the same way. I love all my actors. I have a great relationship with all of them. Okay, next question. So moving to LA, necessary. There are alternate paths. Yes. Moving to LA is kind of the gimme on what you can do, what's available to you. Alternate paths do include screenplay competitions, but the screenplay competitions have to be competitions that matter. All right. There are very few, I think, that I would say actually truly matter. Maybe, I think maybe the most important might be Austin Film Festival. I've judged that various categories a few times, and the thing that's important about Austin is the screenwriters go to Austin. Like it's like screenwriter con, okay, and you can't move without bumping into a writer, and that's all anybody talks about for like 4 days. It's crazy pants, and many of them have read. Like there are writers I've read that I'm like, okay, let's do that, or I've judged pitch competitions. And a couple of times I've been in a place where I said, you know what? You don't win this round, but your pitch is great. And I could sell that pitch, right? And here's what you need to do. Okay, so Austin is huge. Screenplay competitions like that, all right, are huge and important. And you should do a little bit of research on what they are. If you've never heard of them, then they probably don't matter. Other than that, man, it's really hard. There are other centers of film production that you can go to. Like I think Atlanta is big now. You can go down to Atlanta. There are probably opportunities there. New York. but it's harder. Creative director. Okay. Okay, so you're 29 and you're worried that it's too late to start. All right, so we're gonna go back to my origin story, right? When I was rocketed from Krypton, and like my parents, who were nice farmers, found me and they raised me and they taught me not to kill people. Um, I got my start when I was 29, except I had been writing forever, forever. I had been teaching myself to do the job, for that specific job, for a decade. I had been putting myself into a position to recognize and capitalize on an opportunity. I told you I taught middle school. When I was working for the Navy, I was doing applied math. I was an analyst, man. There's not a lot of call for, superhero scripts like when you're working for the chief of naval operations. It just doesn't work that way. You are never too old as long as you're already putting in the work. And if you find yourself saying things to you, your best friend, and you should be your best friend, like, oh shit, I'm 29, I'm aged out. That's actually resistance. That's actually you finding an excuse not to try. You have to try. If it's something that you want to do and you must do it, you can't look at I'm 29 as it's an impediment. It's not. Also, by the way, if you're 29 years old and you've done other things, you've had experiences, right? You've done real things. You can't walk down Hollywood Boulevard without tripping over, college grads and all this others who haven't done anything and don't have anything to write about, right? They haven't really had an experience as an adult that's interesting, that's worth writing about. They don't have any skin in the game. They haven't been married. They don't have kids. They haven't had to deal with a shitty job yet. They think they have, but Starbucks doesn't count. Okay, like you have advantages that you don't quite understand. Okay, so let's talk about like, oh, well, I'm gonna come back to uh to the next one. No, actually, let's address it. So how do you come up with screenwriting ideas if none immediately pop to mind? All right, so let me tell you about the last year of my life. And I told you I just banged out an insane amount of material. Um, it's hard, man, to come up with ideas. And, as I go, sometimes things will occur to me, not fully fleshed out. All right. These things don't pop out Athena-like from the skull of Zeus onto the page. It just doesn't happen. Um, you might hear a snippet of conversation or somebody says something completely stupid or whatever it is that makes you go, there's something in that. And you might not know exactly what it is. Write it down. Write it down. Because in the fullness of time and meditation and consideration, it will reveal itself to you. When I began my process last year, I made a list and I realized I had about 11 things on it. And they were sometimes just phrases, 3 words, right? But I knew vaguely what those things kind of were. And I just put them into my calendar, one a day. And then I put that on repeat. And every day I made my job that day to advance the ball one way or another on one of those ideas or proto ideas or snippet of an idea to figure out something about it. And over time, some things really coalesced and became a thing. Other things simply did not. Some things that I thought were totally going to work and I was going to totally turn into a script and be totally great died halfway through an outline. That's okay, right? You don't know how many ideas you have until you start to just write them down and then give yourself permission to not fully know what they are and not find that frustrating, but just as an indicator that they just need to bake a little bit more. And sometimes thinking about idea 7 helps you figure out something with idea 2. Sometimes you figure out that ideas 3 and 5 are actually the same idea. And if you smush them together, then suddenly they make a lot more sense. Sarah Connor Chronicles. What was that like? It was one of the best creative experiences of my life. Josh Friedman is a genius. He's a difficult genius. It was a difficult show. I learned a whole ton. I had, freedom to do and to try a lot of things and to try to make something great with somebody who wanted to make something great. Um, and I'll give you one sort of revealing look into that process. There was one day towards the very end when the showrunner, Josh Friedman, looks at me and he says, Ash, says, the truth is, I don't know what this show is, but I know what it isn't. Sometimes that's enough. Okay. So things like Coverfly. I am a bit allergic to anyone who says, I am going to charge you money to read your material and give you feedback and help you. I think that there is a cottage industry that has grown up that is in many ways quite exploitative. Because the truth of the matter is they don't care if you're a good writer or a terrible writer or somewhere in between or inexperienced or you have potential or whatever. You are grist for their mill. It is how they pay the bills. And look, I'm sure there are wonderful people in all of these things and people who are incredibly well intentioned. But I have also, I kind of keep tabs on a lot of writer groups, like on Facebook and various places. I don't pop up and kind of show my face. I just like to observe. And, there are so many people who are so desperate to be in this business. And sometimes I just see them being exploited and it makes me angry because look, I was on the other side of that fence once. I was that person. I was the person who just wanted to know something, anything, who just wanted an opportunity, who thought maybe I could do this, right? But I didn't know. And I can tell when people are being honest with you, with those people on those message boards, those forums, those groups, and when they are just shining them on to see if they can make a few bucks off. So I'm not going to cast aspersions specifically on Coverfly. I will vaguely cast aspersions on the Blacklist. So I think that the Blacklist as a business offends me deeply. I think that it purports to be a helpful thing, but I think that it is simply leveraging a brand that was created from nothing, which is, look, the way that it works is that you've got a manager or an agent, you've got a script, and you take it out, and it's a spec. And the assistants, they all read this stuff. And at one point, it was just, the Blacklist was just the assistants and all of that kind of figuring out like what they thought were like the great, like unproduced scripts. And it sort of evolved into something else and taken on a life of its own, and it's turned into a business. Again, I don't, have any problem with them like trying to make money off of screenwriting. It's just when it gets into, there's a difference between making money writing and making money from people who want to be writers and not really helping them. That's what bugs me. I do this for free, right? Like, if they, look, if they wanted me to do 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, whatever the hell it is, I'd sit, I'd do it. I don't care. I'd talk to you all however the hell long you wanted to do that. I am allergic to processes like that. Okay. So, all right, the next question is about Dota and Netflix. So Dota was actually probably the greatest creative experience of my life. I got to be in charge. I got to create my show. I had fights, largely not with Netflix, mostly with the video game company who owned the property. But after a certain point, we kind of made peace, and we figured out that we were all just trying to make a great show. I learned a ton working on that show. I mean, I'd run rooms before. I'd produced a lot of television, like 200 hours. I definitely had been around the block. But what I really got on Dota was a sense of, oh, you just A, really do have to finish things, and B, uh, letting go of things I find precious, right? I started, when I was working on Dota, I started referring to scripts not as scripts, but as documents. I learned that they were not done until the final edit, right? Until animation was complete and sound was complete. Everything had been posted. We'd recorded last ADR. Everything was done, done, done. And then I was done writing. I would recut and rewrite through animatics, through animation, through whatever. I would bring actors in and I would just have them do the ADR. I would have them re-record dialogue, re-record lines. I would do all of that stuff all the time. And that was hugely educational, because I kind of got into a place where, I mean, always my editing notes are always good, but I got into a place where I was essentially editing the show, and I learned a lot about storytelling. I stopped like adhering to a lot of things that I had learned in television about kind of building tension and where to kind of break off one story and move into the next story and all of that. And I realized things I never really thought about before. I changed my entire style of cutting. I moved from, okay, so I'm gonna, break off like on a cliffhanger here, go to the next story, and then come back, and I'm just gonna ratchet up that way. Instead, I learned to cut on emotion, like not to take the audience out of an emotional journey and let them experience that inside the context of the episode and end that where I wanted it to be, and then move into the next, into the B story or to the C story, and then come back. But to really let an emotional state play out, it's a difficult thing, and you get into it, and it starts to make sense. It starts to coalesce, and it doesn't necessarily look right on the page, but when you put it into the cut, suddenly it's a different deal, right? They say that films are made 3 times or written 3 times, once on the page, once on the stage, and once in the edit bay. And the most important is what happens in the edit bay.